I want to work, I'm going to work my way through Pachomius and the travel literature. By travel literature, I mean the things like the history of the monks in Egypt, Palladius's lives of the monks, these sorts of things. And they provide this view of people who took tours of the monasteries in the 4th century. And I want to cover a little bit of them along with the theme of community. And then in the next session in the afternoon, I was thinking of daily life and women and mission as the 3 themes. The way the schedule works, as Jos mentioned, we have a longer time in the morning, actually, and a shorter, only 2.5 hours in the afternoon after lunch. I'm pondering, based on that, taking 4 themes here, and 2 before the break, and then 2 after the break, and then after lunch, then we can do the final 2. Is that okay? The other question I have is the questions of Marilyn Dunn. Oh, those of you who are in the program, do you have your sheet on Marilyn Dunn? Okay. Oh.
I came very ill-equipped. Nothing.
Oh, I think. Do you have a syllabus? Okay. There was a syllabus produced. Yeah, and same with you.
They're all on Facebook.
It's only group on Facebook, but because he just joined the group.
I wasn't part of the Facebook group.
But you know that you were on the group, right?
Yeah.
But you have been to all of the other modules.
No.
No,
My first day.
Okay, this is your first, same as you. This is your first, not, okay, today. And for you?
No idea. I don't know what syllabus.
Okay. Have you been to any of these classes before?
Yeah.
Okay.
All the modules, yes.
All of the other modules. Okay. All right. Unfortunately. Okay. So, you 2 are the only ones to have submitted a review of Marilyn Dunn. Congratulations. Yes. Hopefully you were to have read our book prior to coming here. But that's okay. And that may answer my question, because I was thinking Marilyn Dunn's book has a good chapter on women. The book is called The book is called The Emergence of Monasticism, and it has a good section on women, and I don't want to over-repeat something that you're already familiar with and don't have that much interest in. So we could shorten that lecture a little bit. The other one I don't know about as much. I do a lot of teaching on community in the West, because there is a what's the word I want to use? There is a rise of intentional communities among people, young people particularly in the West. People forming communities and living together and starting little monastic experiments. And so I bring the literature from monasticism to bear on this trend in the United States and elsewhere. But I don't know if that's of any interest here.
So that would be on your website?
Yes, old monastic resources for new monastic people. I have a whole bunch of things that discuss this. Yeah. And so I can cover the community aspect, but didn't know how important that was. So I will judge by your questions and comments where I should keep going, okay? And maybe talk with you a little bit. But we'll start with Pachomius. Or is there actually, in the beginning, is there anything particular in these subjects that make sure and cover this as you look at this outline of the next six sessions? Was there anything particular you looked at and said, oh yes, I want this?
Well, Pachomius and the military background was also for me.
Okay.
I'm interested in the women
Okay, you're interested in the women's piece? Okay.
Particularly, only because I picked it up in the book, about those that had a hermetic
Right, yeah.
life. I think there's one quoted
Yes,
there. That'd be interesting.
okay.
All
Anyone?
of it.
All of it, okay, okay. Anyone else? Okay, I will just go ahead then. Pachomius, the life and the Pachomian koinonia. Yos has made available all three. Well, I guess what I'll do is I'll get to that. 1, 2. Did he make 3?
He did. I think they're on the shelf there,
Oh, okay.
up the top.
2. I only see 2. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I thought you had it there somewhere.
What's the third one?
Yeah.
That one?
Ah, voila. Okay. When I get to that, I will. I'll talk about these.
Where
Okay.
are we in your notes? Just so
You
I
are
can-
now in my notes. You are now at the lecture 4.
Lecture 4.
Yeah,
There's no
Okay.
pages.
that's true. There are no pages. Isn't that
There's
awful?
numbers and-
That's because Yos is just putting this thing together. Yeah. So lecture 4, the life and the koinonia. Question then to begin, what does it take to create a successful community? Leadership? Okay. Good leadership. Anyone else? What do you think when you think of a community? What does it take to make a successful
Organized
community?
structure.
Systems.
Oh,
Yeah, that's it. Organized structure. Yeah, I need to have be organized. Basically.
Okay. Some kind of system.
A need to form a community.
A need. Okay.
The reason why people come.
Can you raise your voice, please?
A need to form a community.
Can I say something? Clear statement or goal or aim. Clear statement, goal or aim.
Okay. Yes. A community must have a clear statement, a goal, or an aim. I want to make sure, by the way, can you test to make sure that when people are talking, you're hearing it? Is that okay?
Working.
It's working?
Yes.
Good. Okay, that's what I wanted to make sure. Good.
But I need you to repeat the question.
Okay, that's right. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, I'll do that. Yeah. Okay, these are good. Clear goal and aim, a leader, some structure, a need. But what if you have too much of a leader? Then you don't have a successful community. What if you have too little structure or too much structure? Then you may not have a successful community. So the question then becomes how to navigate these elements. A clear goal. What if the goal is very, very specified? As you remember, I mentioned yesterday one of my discoveries in wait one second.
أي مجتمع ليه قائد، القائد بيبقى ليه رؤية، والرؤية دي نابعة من قيم، وبيحدد هدف مرحلة.
شفت كده شوية he said that any society or any community has a leader, and this leader who decide which is the aim of or the goal of this.
القيم دي بتحدد من المبادئ بتاعته، القيم بتاعته بتحدد الهدف، بتحدد الرؤية، هو عايز يوصل فين.
The values make the vision clear. The values of your community make the vision clear.
المفروض الناس اللي معاه تبقى مؤمنة بنفس الهدف وبنفس القيم وبنفس الرؤية.
All the people with him should believe in these values and this vision.
Okay. Yeah. So you have the leader and the vision combined together in a single merge. Interesting enough, the way that I did it again. The way that Eustace describes it, he has the values flowing from the leader. Yes? In the West, in Western monasticism, like Benedict and some of these other expressions, the leader flows from the values, which is like the written rule. And so it's turned around in terms of who is subject to who. Yeah? Yeah, I think so. Now, why I bring this up is because of all of the institutions in human history. Monasticism is the oldest living institution, that persists. The Buddhist Sangha and the Christian monastic expressions have survived longer than nations, longer than businesses, longer than anything. You will find that monasteries have survived when other institutions have fallen apart. In terms of like single, the monasteries in like St. Anthony or something like that, they have been in existence for 1,500 years. There are no other institutions like that. So you ask, well, wow, this is good. The Benedictines have been around for a long time. Why? We should look into something. There might be something to learn from that kind of cohesiveness. Individual churches have come and go, all over the place. But monastic communities have seemed to stay. And the church itself has come and survived. So it brings me to ask the question, what does it take to foster a successful community? Or even a network of them? That is the subject of Pachomius, for example. Because what's Pachomius's novel contribution to the history of monasticism is that he founded not only monasteries, but a network of monasteries. A franchise, shall we say? Yeah. So, 2 points to begin with. Pachomius was not the inventor of communal monasticism. Obviously, his chief follower, Theodore, himself was active in a monastery prior, before Pachomius ever founded his monastery at, Pibo. I forget how, Pibo. How do you pronounce it? What was it? Pibo? P-B-O-W. How is this?
In Egypt and Egyptian, in English or in Arabic?
Well, I think there's a name there. I remember last year you gave me.
Yeah, it's in Upper Egypt.
Okay. Yes.
We have a lot of relics from it in the Coptic Museum. So
Okay, and how do you pronounce that word?
I think it is Bawit.
Bawit?
Yes.
Okay, Bawit.
It's the one in the
Okay.
Coptic Museum.
Yeah, okay.
There's one in the Oasis, Western, one in Asyut.
Okay.
Two Bawits.
Okay. Anyway, so there was communal monasteries, as we remember. Antony is leaving his sister in a group. So his invention was not the fellowship or the community itself. Pachomius' invention really was the united network of monasteries. It was this community of monasteries that was Pachomius' contribution. In the same way that Antony was not the inventor of monastic practice, Antony's contribution, as I mentioned last night, was the withdrawal into the inner desert, into the far desert. Furthermore, as we mentioned, we think about Pachomius as a quote-unquote desert father. But Pachomius did not live in the desert. Pachomius moved from the desert to start his communities to abandoned villages in Upper Egypt. And we talked about that. So just to clear that up, so Pachomius, his contribution is this network of monasteries. Now, we have a lot of sources for the study of Pachomius and his life. There are the lives of Pachomius. This volume here gives the set of lives. There is, in this volume, the Bohairic life, the Greek life, the Sahidic life, 1 and 2 and 3. And so there's a number of different versions of the life of Pachomius. Now, you also not only have lives, you also have rules. And this second volume, that's the third volume. The second volume has just mentions about Pachomius in chronicles and letters, and mentions in the Lausaic history of Palladius. But then it also has the Pachomian rules, both the rules of St. Pachomius and then the regulations of Horsaeus, who followed Pachomius later. And in these rules, you discover much about Pachomius himself. So it's a source not only for the community, but it also tells us about Pachomius himself. Then, third, you have, in this volume, you have instructions and letters and other writings. So you've got writings of Pachomius, letters, instructions, fragments, writings of Theodore, his followers, and Horsaeus, like I mentioned. So all of these are going to give us a lot of information about who Pachomius was. And I think that will give you a sense of what goes on. The consensus is that you've got a Coptic oral memories that are developing. Probably the two great lives, the Bohairic and the first Greek lives, they share probably a common lost source. None are entirely historical. There's a little bit of story and a little bit more strict history, but it's mixed. But you could certainly learn a great deal of good things that are true about Pachomius out of these. But as with all of this literature, you have to kind of take their purpose in mind as you read the history itself. So now we move to the life itself, and I will just summarize some of this material. The life gives the fact that he had a pagan childhood in a place called Sned. I don't know how you would pronounce that here. And then he was in the army, and there's this delightful story. Let's see. Around 312, 313, it might take too much time to find that story. There's this wonderful story of, so Pachomius, who was 20 years old, is recruited into the army. Although he was not too sturdy, they took him in with the others because of the great number they recruited. As he was led away to the boat with his companions, he raised his eyes to heaven and sighed, "My Lord Jesus, may your will be done." And then they got on board and sailed north to them. When they arrived at Net, the capital of the ancient empire, the men were brought into the city and thrown into the prison. In the evening, some citizens of that city brought bread and victuals to the prison, and they compelled the recruits to eat, because they saw them sunk in great affliction. When young Pachomius saw them, namely saw this kind of help that was going on from the people, he asked the men who were with him, "Why are these people so good to us when they do not know us?" They answered, "They are Christians, and they treat us," namely us pagans. The Christians are treating the pagans with love for the sake of the God of heaven. And what you find then is from the very beginning of Pachomius's introduction to Christianity, he is coming into grips with the compassion and the care of Christians for each other. I say that because I want you to notice that this will be a theme throughout Pachomius's life. He then gets a call from God to found a monastery of people that he cares for them. And this kind of compassionate care, the living out of the love of God for one another, through love for one another, is characteristic of Pachomius. And he witnessed it in the very, very beginning. Rhonda, was there a question you had in particular about that story and Pachomius' military background?
No, but how it influenced him later on to found these, houses with the head for each, and the whole division and the communal living, which he was probably influenced by.
I see what you mean. Yes. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Okay. So he's helped by Christians. He resettles in somewhere that I would pronounce Seneset, and he's baptized in 313, and is apprenticed as a monk under Pimon, Abba Pimon. Palamon, I'm sorry. Pimon is someone else. Then there is, he receives a revelation, a voice comes to him, and the voice tells him instructs him to build a monastery that others will become a part of it, and they will profit from it. It will profit their souls. Again, the idea of him needing to start something. Instead of a call to go away and be isolated in the desert, it's a call to leave the desert and to come and to start something with other people being a part of that. Does that make sense? So, he moves to Tabanesi in 323, and then has a second revelation, harvesting. Hi, Sana. And then people arrive, Brother John, his sister Mary, they have some tests, and there's some real conflicts between people. I mean, that's a very interesting thing, because at the very beginning, you have this struggle with conflicts. How are people who are different going to get along? This is the important thing. And it's a theme that actually runs all the way through the lives of Pachomius. He has tensions with Horseus, with Theodore, with others, and he reconciles. And this is a marvelous theme throughout the story. In 329 or 330, you have the first visit of Athanasius, and this is where there's the whole story of Pachomius hiding to avoid ordination. They wanted to ordain him and make him a priest or bishop, and he refuses. I can't remember whether it was priesthood. I think it was priesthood. Yes. Then the group grows. In 329, then you have a second foundation that's made. By 345, there are 9 separate monasteries for men and 2 monasteries for women. And again, I want to repeat, you'll be reading a book in this class. Yes. Yeah, I should say this too. For those of you, because some of you will not be doing the 13 weeks. Most of you will be doing the 13 weeks of classes after I leave. But some of you may not if you're just auditing. This book, The Desert Christians, An Introduction to the Literature of Early Monasticism, is a fabulous book. He does a good job of covering, the chapters cover each of these subjects in good detail. And the idea for our 13 weeks is you'll be reading a little bit of this and then the primary sources. You will actually be reading Life of Pachomius. You'll be reading Pachomian rules through the next 13 weeks. But this will also supplement that reading. And I say that because William Harmless, the author of this book, I read a summary for him. He writes, Pachomius' achievement comes from the way he brought together a collection of monasteries into a tightly regulated whole, with a single head, a carefully ordered hierarchy of offices, and an intricate rhythm of work and prayer and spiritual formation. So I'll talk more about communities as we move into the next lecture, but you get just a little bit there. Pachomian then has a season of sickness, and again more tensions with Theodore, and they restore themselves together. In 346, Pachomius then contracts the plague, and he dies of the plague in 346. And then there's a bit of tension again about the successor, someone named Petronius, and again Horseus and Theodore, and so then there's some more expansion, plus and minuses about that expansion, and there's more reconciliation. Theodore himself dies in 346, and they move in to a new transition, and so on and so forth. I want to mention, do I have that? Yeah, the Pachomian movement itself dies in later years. There's some theological tensions within the church in Egypt in the 5th century regarding the Council of Chalcedon. And that's part of the tension, and just different things led ultimately to the demise of Pachomius's monastery in that period later on. Okay, any questions about the life of Pachomius? Okay.
Did Pachomius have a certain place to live, or he was just living throughout all the monasteries he established?
He had his headquarters in one of the monasteries, but then would visit the other monasteries to make sure they had their own leaders as well. But he was the head over the hegemon.
Yes.
He would be that hegemon over all of those monasteries. But then he had other leaders appointed for them. But he would stay at one generally. I think it's similar here a bit.
If he was not the inventor of communal monasticism, who was?
That's a good question. Nobody knows. Because there were, we don't have any evidence of a single founder of community monasticism. All we know is that in the 3rd century, 4th century, we hear stories of women's groups here, or another group there, or something like that. And so, I talked about last night, but we really don't know any single founder of community monasticism.
Why does Coptic church history attribute it to him? Why does they attribute the invention of communal monasticism to him?
That's a very good question. In the same way that they attribute the founding of Anchoritic monasticism to Antony. And it's largely because of, do we have the life of Antony here? No, okay. The two most popular books describing these things are The Life of Antony by Athanasius and The Life of Pachomius and the Pachomian Rules that were collected. These two were very popular works, and so they became symbols of those two different forms of monasticism. Antony became the symbol of Anchoritic monasticism, and Pachomius became the symbol of the communal monasticism, even though they were not technically the first. They were the fathers in the sense that they modeled it very well, but they weren't necessarily the very, very first person to start that. Does that make sense?
Yeah, but was Antony exposed to Anchoritic monasticism before he actually chose it for himself? Or was it just off the top of his head?
In the life of Antony, you find, one moment, you find that Antony himself went and visited other men and learned. You know, it says in the life of Antony that Antony learned about this from this person, and he learned about something else from another man. Now, those weren't necessarily anchorites in the sense of moving out to the desert, but they were solitary, holy men living on the edge of a village. So, of course, Antony would have been exposed to some form of anchoritic monasticism. Pachomius himself was led by a man named Palamon, who taught him things. So you see what I mean? And even in the discussion about Palamon, what's interesting to see, if I can find this quick enough, there's a good description. Okay, yeah, so he's learning from Palamon here, and Abba Palamon, so Pachomius is learning from Abba Palamon, who came obviously before him. And Abba Palamon is telling Pachomius about the way that we live. And he says, the rule of monastic life, according to what we have learned from those who went before us, is as follows. We always spend half the night, and often from evening to morning, in vigils, and also doing manual work with threads, hairs, or palm fibers. And whatever is above and beyond, we give to the poor, and eating and drinking, and the rule for gathering together, etc. So obviously, Abba Palamon, who was before Pachomius, had a way of life that was customary to them, who learned from those who went before them. So you take 2 generations further back, and you clearly have some commonly recognized way of life by either anchorites or some collection of people prior to Pachomius and Antony. Does that help make sense? Yeah. Okay, good. Oh, yes.
About the death of Saint Pachomius.
Yes.
He said it's not in the 5th century. It's not in the 5th century.
No.
It's in the 3.
القديس بخومي اتنيح 349 والأنبا أنطونيوس بعت رسالة تعزية لأبنائه.
341.
Yeah. No. It's the.
الخلافات الأريوسية.
He attended the Arians' heresies.
Right.
يعني كان في فرق من الزمان قرن من الزمان.
Around like 1
I think I'm not talking about the death of Pachomius himself, but the Pachomian tradition or the communities. Are we okay?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, now, when I asked the question, what does it take to make a successful community, what was the first thing someone said?
Leader.
Exactly, leader. And that was, Cynthia, you were right on.
Well, I meant it more in a broad sense, leadership, maybe not down to an individual, but as the different.
Right. So, what I want to move forward then is the lives of Pachomius have a great deal of discussion about leadership and what is a good leader. And so I think that would be, if you want to know more about the particular book, The Life of Pachomius, which actually is not just a life of Pachomius, but a life of Pachomius, Theodore, and Horsatius, you will see that it has a lot of discussion about good leadership. So let's move on and discuss a little bit about those themes. Foundations of compassionate servanthood. if you remember, when I mentioned the life of Pachomius, I mentioned that his interest in Christianity began by looking at Christians, helping them, and saying, well, why are those Christians helping people? From the very beginning, it was compassion for one another that moved him. His first followers, the story of Pachomius and his very first followers, when there's maybe 3 or 4 people following him in his first monastic experiment, it says about Pachomius, they saw him laboring alone in the work of the monastery, whether tending a few vegetables or getting their food ready, or if someone knocked at the door of the monastery, it was he who went to answer. I always think that's fun because, I mean, you know, if you live in a big community and you get visitors all the time, the last thing you want to do is, if you're in the middle of your work, to go open the door and be interrupted by the person who comes and visits. You know what I mean? Pachomius was the one who did that. He took care of the food, and if someone was going to interrupt the community, it was Pachomius that was going to face that interruption. So he was the cook, he was the guest master, you know, he kind of does all of these things. It was he who went to answer them. If any of them was sick, he ministered to him until he got well. So he was also the physician. Theodore writes, they write about Theodore, he took care of their souls night and day. So not only Pachomius' leadership, but Theodore's leadership. Theodore had a great concern in his heart, day and night, for the souls which the Lord had entrusted him. This is a good leader. A good leader is the one who thinks, who meditates on the people to know what kind of ministry is appropriate to each person. In a lot of Christian literature in the early times, they describe a good leader as a physician of souls. You've heard that phrase? The cure to ours is where you make sure the right diagnosis and the right dosage of treatment for each individual, because it's not going to be simply one kind of treatment for everybody. And this is the way that this book describes Pachomius and describes Theodore too. Theodore is Pachomius' successor. In this book, in the Desert Christians, William Harmless describes some of Theodore's gifts of leadership. One being the care of souls. He cared for people. Number 2, he idealized the memory of Pachomius. And I think this is very important, that sometimes we begin communities with a value, and a value that is rooted in a person's life and history. And a good leader returns the people to their memory of the original foundations of the community. One of the people I have learned about this week, as I have been here, is a gentleman by the name of Father Mata El-Miskin. You know him?
Yes, very, very famous.
Okay, who is he? Cynthia does not know. Can someone just give a summary quickly?
He is the founder of St. Macarius. He is the one who took care of it, and he wrote a lot of books, and he has a great community of monks there. So
But who's not the founder?
he's not a founder, but he is
He was the head of the monastery.
head of the monastery for a period of time, a long period of time, and he was a spiritual father, and he did a lot of good things to the monastery to grow up to the monks themselves. He has a lot of publishing articles, books, and stuff. He's very famous. Some people abroad and even here in Egypt write PhD theses about it.
He was a Sufi of sorts. He was a Sufi of sorts, like if you could say he's a Christian Sufi.
But you came saying he's kind of a caretaker of souls.
Yeah,
That's what brought you to him.
Yeah, what I was struck at and why I'm bringing up his name, and there's, different people have lots of things to say about this man.
But not everyone agree with him.
Yes, I understand. Yeah, but why I bring this up, because I do know there are some tensions and things like that. But why I bring this up is because one of the things that he was trying to do when the Pope asked him to come and restore the monastery at St. Macarius is that he brought them back to the original foundations. He tried to encourage the people with the vision of early 4th century monasticism and say, let us regain our own heritage. And he brought the memory of early monasticism back to the people. And I think that's exactly what is being described here is Horseus, one of Theodore's gifts was that he brought the memory of Pachomius. What was Pachomius' original vision of a community? And Pachomius actually was trying to bring us back to the original vision of Acts chapter 4, like I mentioned last night, where a community of people who were sharing things in common, who were devoting themselves to the apostles' teaching and to fellowship and the breaking of bread. And so you find this, I think good leaders bring us back to our foundational heritage. The other thing that Pachomius and Theodore did was they have the ability to read hearts. They listen, and in listening, both from the gift of God and inside of themselves, they are able to see and hear the heart of someone so that they can care for what is best. Okay? And even the rules of the Pachomian monastery grew out of his compassion. So I'm reading from the life of Pachomius here, and it says, in fact, he, namely Pachomius, established for them, and this is actually in the same place when it talks about his taking care of them by helping their food and helping them when they're sick. And then it says, in fact, he established for them an irreproachable lifestyle and traditions profitable for their souls in rules, which he took from the Holy Scriptures. Absolute equality in their clothing and food and decent sleeping arrangements. And again, later on it says, Pachomius also wrote down in a book the rules of the brothers and sent to them so that they might learn them. And again, our father Pachomius was diligent to instruct them in the knowledge of the saints and was working at the salvation of the brothers' souls as a vineyard cared for by a good and industrious gardener. For he gave them laws and traditions. Some were committed to writing, others were learned by heart after the manner of the holy Gospels of Christ. So you see, in Pachomius' own situation, he found, and I think maybe in part because he had a number of people all living together, and he wanted to care for them all, I think Pachomius wrote rules down because he said, for this group of people, we need something structured that is going to help the group as a whole live an orderly and God-glorifying life. And this it's Pachomius' own compassion that is the origin of the Pachomian rules of life. Make sense? Yeah, yes.
Now, I may be wrong here, but I think Dunn refers to the fact that his regime was very militaristic and harsh.
Yeah, that's an interesting question. Dunn does mention that, and it was certainly very structured, and there were punishments if you did not follow. And so, yeah, I think it was certainly well structured, certainly militaristic, and I think perhaps, like Rhonda mentioned, some of that may have indeed come from Pachomius's military background. The other thing we have to keep in mind is that this was an era where order was brought in these kinds of ways. I mean, we'll see the same thing when we get to Shenouda. This whole discussion comes up when we get to Shenouda at the end of our, when we get to Saturday, and the lecture on Saturday. Because there's a lot of discussion about Shenouda's punishment of monks, and but that's a different culture than we live in today.
Yeah.
And it's easy. I don't know. Evan's arrogant opinion is that yes, it might have been harsh, but I don't know if it would be that harsh compared to its own culture's way of ordering a lot of people together in an environment. I don't want to be over, especially as an American, it would be easy for me to judge that.
I wrote an essay recently on Alexandria in this time, and the perception was that it was a fairly unruly place. Societal differences, lots of conflicts between different sects and religions and what have you. Could this kind of organized community have been a contrast to that? People coming from urban settings which were basically chaotic.
Yes, or urban settings, or surrounding villages and things like that. I think you ended up having a wide range of people all put in one place that had to learn to get along.
Yeah.
And so he's going to, well, in America we say he put his foot down on some of this. So, yeah.
Okay.
Okay, so that's the first quality of a Pachomian leader, is compassionate servanthood. So even the rules of life, I think, are the expression of Pachomius's compassionate servanthood. Second, a good leader lives and fosters humility and reconciliation. There's this delightful story, 42 and 43. Is that page number? Yeah. He was again. It's the willingness to ask forgiveness of another. The willingness to actually to lose face before someone else. Do you know that phrase, losing face? Okay. He's having tensions, and he knows that, anyway, he says, "Alas for me," Pachomius says in his prayer, "for the mind of the flesh is in me. I am going to die. Indeed, it is written, the carnal thought is death. Whether I am put to the test justly or unjustly for good reason, have mercy on me, Lord, lest I be lost. If the enemy finds little by little a place for himself within me, he will overcome me in the end." He is realizing his own anger. He is realizing his own bitterness against a friend. And then he says, I believe that if your abundant mercy helps me, I will learn how to walk the way of the saints, stretching out toward what lies ahead, for they indeed have put the enemy to shame with your help. So he kept praying like this from evening until morning. And then he came out from his prayer, and he called his brother, and they made the prayer together. He says, we need to pray together. And then Pachomius mortified himself till the end of the prayer, and then he humbled himself, saying, "Forgive me, for I got angry with you." You have this willingness to confess, to ask forgiveness, to be humble. Another example of this we find in between tensions between Theodore Horsacius. In page 254 here, I'll give you another example. And they had been in tension Our father Theodore then persuaded Horsatius to sit and speak to the brothers from the word of God as he did formerly. He had been actually kicked out, and now they're reconciling him back in. And he obeyed him with great humility and sat and held long discourses from the Holy Scripture. Appa Theodore also sat listening like all his brothers, with his face cast down and weeping because of the penetrating words he heard from Appa Horsatius. And he said with his mouth and with all his heart, I am the son of Appa Horsatius and his assistant. And so you find again this willingness to take the lower position, even though he was above. There's this reconciliation. He takes the humble place, and unity is brought. A good leader is one who fosters humility and reconciliation. The third is that a good leader structures for harmony. He creates structures that will promote harmony for this group. William Harmless writes, at the heart of Pachomius' legislation was the desire to create, down to the nitty-gritty details of everyday life, a community of equals. That's what he wanted. People from low status, people from high status, from different countries, different languages. Pachomius wanted to make a community of equals. The New Testament vision was enunciated in the Acts of the Apostles, was central, and we talked about that. This text and its parallel in Acts 2 appear again and again in Pachomian literature. He creates through the rules and his work this community of equals. In terms of the garden, how much food you have, the resources. Pachomius knew that people could use house jobs. I mean, that's the interesting thing, is that Pachomius knew that different people could, if they were in charge of something, they could have their own little kingdom. I am in charge of this part of the monastery, and you can't have any say. And so he would rotate people. He would be wise to know who was trying to feel like they had power over them, because I'm the librarian, and I can give you a book, and you can't have it, And so he would rotate people so that nobody felt constantly in power over someone else, but that they were all equals. He recognized that nothing so damages the equality of a community as this sort of behavior of me being in charge and me being able to have power over you. And if some of the Pachomian precepts and laws, the second volume, states, if some quarrel arises among the brothers, it will be the responsibility of the elders to hear and judge, or in the place of an absent housemaster, for example, to hear and judge the case and scold the culprit. And the point is so that at their command the brothers may immediately make peace wholeheartedly. The aim is to make peace. And this is where we first get examples of what are called chapter meetings. Have any of you heard of chapter meetings? Okay, in the West it's more familiar. In the East, sometimes you'll use the word synaxis, but it's not the liturgical synaxis for prayer, but a gathering where we talk about our life as a community together. And for example, in volume 2, page 72, Of course I'm going to miss it. Okay. One of the monks, here they are gathered together. One of the monks rose up as if inspired and asked Theodore to tell his faults in front of all. Theodore looked at him and told him, it is good for a man to bear the yoke in his youth. He shall sit alone and be silent, because he had borne it upon himself. He shall offer his cheek to the one who strikes him, and he shall be filled with insults. So what you have is this kind of willingness to have your faults exposed to one another and to be corrected in a public situation. And that's the beginning of what in later Western monasticism is called the chapter of faults, where we confess our sins to one another and that sort of thing. You also have meetings in general in both the volumes. You find discussions of how we gather together and discuss our own life as a community. How are we getting along? Do we have problems? Is the chore list that you put on the refrigerator, are people still doing, do you put lists of things to do on your refrigerators? Yes. Yeah. In communities, in intentional communities, usually on the refrigerator is posted your list of chores, who's to do what responsibility. And so I imagine in early Pacomian monasteries there being a refrigerator somewhere with the list of different people's chores that they will put in. And then some people, they have to have a meeting and say, you know, the garbage is not getting taken out regularly. Someone has to come up and do this. So they have meetings in general. The other thing that Pacomius does in order to structure a life of harmony, not only is there this forgiveness, not only are there meetings for confession of sins and for organizing the community, but also what's known as visitations. In volume 1, 93, see if I can find it. Once our father Pacomius went again to Tabanesi for a visit to the brothers, and because of a slight transgression one brother had made. As soon as he arrived at the monastery, he made first of all haste to weave his mat in his usual manner, and while he's working on it, a man entered, and so on and so forth. The point of I want to drop into this, because there's this whole discussion about his conversation with this person, is that Pacomius goes and visits another one of the monasteries that are a part of this same federation of monasteries, because he heard that, something might be wrong. What you get from this, then, is the development of a habit of people who go from one monastery to another monastery to visit that monastery and make sure that are things going okay. Maybe there is something wrong, and we should check up and make sure that they're doing all right. Because even among themselves, they may not know what's wrong. But if we have visitors, the visitors can see how everything is. Now, Eustace, I have a question for you. In Coptic monasticism today, in the different monasteries, is there a practice where someone from one monastery would visit another to correct or to learn?
لا هو ما يقدرش يروح يصحح حاجه، لكن هو بيروح عشان يستفيد من خبره الاباء اللي موجودين في الدير الثاني.
He can go correct, but he can go and learn from the experience of other fathers in the other monastery.
لان كل دير ليه رئاسه مستقله.
Every monastery, each monastery has its own leader.
الوحيد اللي ليه حق التصحيح الاب البطريرك.
So the patriarch can correct the mistake, or I think the leader of the mosque, or the leader.
قائد الدير رئيس الدير المستقل او الاب البطريرك من حقه انه يتدخل في اي حاجه في
The leader
اي
or
دير.
the patriarch who can correct a mistake or who can handle situations.
هو مفتوحه الزياره انه يروح ياخد خلوه في الدير ده ويستفيد من الاباء ويرجع.
But the monastery is open for anyone who want to learn and to get experience from the monastery.
إذا كان مرتبط بصداقة شخصية بأب معين ممكن يتكلم معاه
If there is a friendship, he can talk to other monks.
ملوش السلطة إنه
He doesn't have the authority to just.
Does the patriarch make a habit of visiting the monasteries and making sure they're healthy?
باستمرار.
Yes, he always.
Okay. So in a similar way, just as Pachomius might have visited his monasteries, the patriarch here visits the monasteries in Egypt and makes sure that things are healthy. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, that is the end of lecture.